Well, when I look back in the probably early 90s, well, really even during the 80s, I would see Lucille Belen everywhere. I would see her in her role as a city council person. I worked at Ingham Regional Medical Center. She was very involved with the hospital. But I was half afraid of her and just so admired her. And as I looked at her, as one of the few women, a woman business person, a woman who, even if it was in the hospital, was interacting mainly with men, held her own, of course. But in government, I was already very interested in government. Had no idea I'd ever run for anything at that point. So I would look at her from afar in awe, not realizing at the time she truly was a role model for me. So fast forward a few years, and I decided to run for Lansing City Council in 1995. And I remember thinking about that and knew that one of the first people I had to go meet and visit, and I had never met her except to say hello, I mean, I'd never really had a conversation, was Lucille Belen. Because in Lansing at that time, you needed, as a candidate, you wanted to get the stamp of approval, or at least not to have disapproval of Miss Belen. So I called her up, and we met for coffee, and I believe it was in the old Radisson coffee shop restaurant. And I told her that I was thinking about running, and she was supportive, thought that would be a good idea, realistic, wanted to know why I wanted to run, but then from that point on, was always supportive. I would call her periodically to get advice from her, but she was really an early role model for a woman, one of the only women I saw as a female in an elected position, and a very powerful one. Well, just knowing her own history, looking back at her family history, of course, her mother was an amazing woman for her time also. Ran for the legislature, cared about people, made things happen, started, I believe it was visiting nurses in our community. So I think Lucille Belen saw that from the time she was a child, and so cared about people, knew the importance of community, and obviously felt that through politics or elected office, she could make a difference. And I think all of those things combined that made her step up, run for office, and of course, shape this community for decades to come. Of course, during her whole political career, she was also a successful businesswoman. And so she had the rare balance, really, of caring about people, understanding people, but yet a very pragmatic business sense. And I think that allowed her to see all different communities in our city and understand what people needed, wanted, what it entailed to make a city successful. One of my most vivid memories of Lucille Belen that stuck with me was when she lost, and that was 3 years before I even was going to run for office. So at that point, I didn't have that in mind. But the day after the election was the United Way breakfast, which they did every year. You had to be there at like 7 a.m. and huge crowd of people, 800 people, Kellogg Center. She had lost the election, which after 37 years of being on the city council must just have been devastating. I got there, to go to the breakfast, and there is Lucille Belen in a red suit, up front and center, talking to people, not one bit of poor me. What that took to be able to lose with not only grace, but forward movement impressed me forever. And I always hoped that I would be able to do the same thing and not just stay in bed and put the covers up over my head the next day thinking I'd lost this major election. But that impressed me immensely. And she never whined about it in the, the days to come, years to come. She never said the election was stolen from her or that anything. It was just, well, I lost, and she just went on. Oh, her hats? Yes. And of course, I think everybody remembers that. She had beautiful hats, and she wore a hat always. And she always, of course, was impeccably dressed in a suit. I don't think I ever saw her wear trousers, pants. I think she always had a skirt dress on. But her hats were her trademark. We tend to only look back at first at the generation we know. And so young women today wouldn't have that opportunity to have known Lucille Belen. But studying her and the role she had, her spirit, her courage, pragmatism, it's a lesson for everyone. And she was one of the first. If we can imagine what that took to be the only woman on that city council. And she was not a flower on the wall as a city council member. She was a power to be reckoned with. One of the other things that she told me from the beginning was count your votes. Like, always count your votes. So one time, I don't even remember the issue. I was on the city council, and I was just ticked off at something. So I made a motion that I knew wouldn't pass, but I just wanted to make people, my colleagues, have to put their vote up on it. Well, it went down. It might have been 7-1 or something. That next morning, I got a call from Lucille, and it said, "Joan, what were you thinking?" And I said, well, it was an important issue. And she said, "You never, ever make a motion if you don't know you have the votes to win." And that's how pragmatic she was. I would have loved to have known her mother. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that family, because it sounds like a remarkable family. And I do think that there must have been the sense that you got things done, and you had to do that pragmatically. You didn't always get your way, and sometimes you had to compromise immensely, but that you did so to move forward and get things done. Lucille Belen was on many boards and commissions, and one of the things what she believed in, she was willing to go the extra mile and try to make happen. And she would tell this story often, as would Sandy Dragoo. Sandy was like the executive assistant, probably executive secretary, assistant to the director of the Transportation Authority for many years, and probably did much of the work, could do the job. He resigned, or it came time to hire a new person. I think they made Sandy the interim director, and then the board, of course, was going to hire someone else. And they started, and Lucille Belen said, "Absolutely not. We are going to hire this woman, Sandy Dragoo, who can do the job, who has done the job." And they did it. And it was probably almost all men on that board at the time. And they hired her, and Sandy ended up staying there doing a phenomenal job at CATA for years and years and years. But Lucille was able to make things happen, and really her actions followed what she believed in. You guys know another funny story? This was in Zonta. You don't have to tape this one. So Lucille was in Zonta, and I was in Zonta. I was a young woman in Zonta at that time, and she was an older. And Zonta was a very powerful group of women before they could be in Rotary in that day and age. So there were, 80 members. And one of her best friends, who was also a notable woman, same age, same, level of authority in a different job, came to Zonta and said, "Oh, what we're going to do every week," she announces this to the group, "is we're going to play Crayola Payola. We're going to pull a color out, and everybody who's wearing that color that day has to pay $1. And Lucille, out loud, says, "That is the dumbest idea I have ever heard in my life." And that was the end of it. The end. There was no more discussion about. The woman kind of said, "Okay." It's like she spoke, and that was done. She was very blunt, and you couldn't. For me, again, as a younger woman at the time, it was good for me because that is not my style, and I had to learn to not be offended, hurt. It was just her way, and I really appreciated the lessons I learned from that, and how you just had to, again, answer her and still stand up for your own opinion. And it wasn't always easy because she was direct, told you exactly what she thought. But if you didn't agree, presented why, she was fine with that. She didn't hold that against you. But I had to learn. That was a good lesson for me.